Well, hello, Chris. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and have a discussion with me and to answer some of my questions. As you well know, we have something very big in common, which is that we are both children of the Windrush generation. We were both born in Birmingham, and we both moved from Birmingham to Wales. So we've got quite a lot in common. But I'm going to ask you about your experiences growing up. And the first thing I want to ask you is, how strong was your connection as a child to Jamaica, since that's where both of our mothers came from?
Sata Masagana, La Hamla, Ushula E. Blessings to God that He be praised. Bird, how are you, Nat? Blessings, blessings, blessings. My connection to Jamaica as a child, it was total. That's all I was connected to, was Jamaica. As a child, you know, the food we ate, the drink what we drank, the stories what we were told, and Nancy and all of the stories. My mother reliving the experiences as a child growing up, so we had cultural stories of our own background. Family, you know, going to weddings, funerals, christenings, congregation of family. So everything to us was Jamaican, you know, yeah, everything.
I love that. Yeah, I can relate to a lot of that as well. So what I'm going to ask you, following on from that, what did being a child of the Windrush generation, having parents that came from that era to come over here and work, what did that mean to you? And this is quite a deep question, and I realise it's quite a wide.
Yeah, well, you know, the question is the question, the answer is the answer, because the answer only can be the truth, you know. So, well, being a child of the Windrush, the experience. Well, firstly, I came from a one-parent family, so I didn't have that support of a father and coming to work. So my experience is quite different from others. For example, now today, it's quite common for everyone to be in a one-parent family, or, you know, not being married, etc., etc. You know, back in the 60s, it wasn't that way, you know. So actually, being a child of the Windrush was a very hard experience for me. We got rebuked by, I'm not talking about our family, because family is family, but by the church. So I never read no great though. By the church, we was really rebuked. Wasn't allowed to go to Sunday school, you know, where everyone else went. Wasn't my mother?
That's sad, isn't it, to have that rejection?
At that age, yeah. You know what was very sad for me? Because it put me on the streets back then, you know, where it was a dangerous time, you know, growing up. And when you know that the majority of the community are at church, right? Yeah, who's left out isn't the most desirable, as you would say. It's a very dangerous time. So actually, yeah, getting that rejection from the church, and my point was, it's not really the experience of what I had there from the church. It's the experience what my mother had. I seen how it affected my mother. I seen when she's praying every day, every night, up in her room, calling me to read a Psalms, calling me to read the Bible. you know, with teaching me how to read from the Bible. You know, it was early, it got affected. So going on from that, I also would have to say, growing up as a one-parent family, I'll have to refer again to my mother, you know. The places as a child, I seen her work in the back of shops, cutting off chickens' head, plucking chickens, you know, that sort of work. I can still remember that up at this bench, you know, right at the back and everything like that. So I can remember my mother doing work like that. My mother was a great cake maker, you know, so very renowned for her cake making. So that kind of brought a little income in. But you see, what offset everything is, because being a one-parent family, in the 60s, you get rebuked by any of the community. We moved to a white area when I was 5, you know. I remember, I won't go through all the experiences because they're too vast. It's like every day, you know. So as racism goes, I remember one of the first experiences, and that's with my mother, with my 2 brothers and my sisters behind her. She called us all out of the house, and she had a knife in her hand, and she walked onto, we was in a green, and there was these people chanting some racist things, you know, go back home, blah blah blah, and, you know, nigga, lick my boots before I send you back to roots and all of that sort of thing. So my mother took all of us and confronted them. And, you know, she shouted to them, right? Yeah, you know, I'm not going nowhere. You've got to kill me, all of my kids here today, right? Yeah. And, you know, it was along that line. So it was like oohing and ahhing and all of that. But, you know, the crux of the story was that my mother died in the same road, and she's highly loved by everyone by that time. That's the same. So actually, you know, the Windrush itself, the school experience, you know, say from 68 to the 70s, early 73, you know, junior and infant school, you know, right? It was all right. It was all right. You know, you had to be careful. We had the National Front. You always had to be careful going home, you know, from junior school. Always, you know, make sure you walk with somebody, right? Yeah. A lot of times we had to run, you know. It was just the area we was living in then, you know, because we moved the area. Yeah. We moved from the slums of slums, but they tell you about those houses where with rats and by the railway stations and dark and gloom. So when we got to Farmer Road, it was like paradise, you know. But, you know, again, for all total experience growing up in school, from I moved to secondary school, which was an all-white boys school, was this is what curved me into who I am today.
But you know, that brings me on to my next question, because that's where it seemed to have changed for a lot of us Windrush children, is when we went to secondary school. And I wanted to ask you if you ever had any opportunities to celebrate your cultural heritage in any way. And I know that's a quick trick question, really, because I will know the answer before you answer it, really. But, you know, if you could tell me a bit about how was your heritage or culture seen throughout your schooling, really?
Okay, so no, you was expecting that. My culture wasn't celebrated. In fact, the opposite. It was neglected. So, you know, we couldn't talk like this, we couldn't talk like that, we couldn't talk like we used to talk. We had to talk very specific. when I went there to a 99% all-white school, I was actually targeted, has to be the word, by teachers. You know, I must say I have and did have a form of dyslexia and autism. So in that time, they just said she was bad anyway. They didn't accept things like that. So I'll look at it from that point of view. But on my point of view, what was happening, I was getting ruled in every class. You know,
Can you explain what you mean by ruled, Chris?
Oh, they used to get the ruler and just hit you on your hand. I used to get caned excessive, more than any other person in the school. I couldn't take it no more. Honestly, after a year and a half, nuts, right? Yeah, I could not take it no more because I was getting caned. And when I went to gym, I was getting slippered. You know.
Did they tell you what was your misdemeanor that warranted being caned then in their eyes?
It was always for making a disruption in class. It was always for asking the question what shouldn't be asked. I'm always good for asking the question what shouldn't be asked. So yeah, it was always for asking or questioning or maybe sometimes disputing. You know, in the gym, I was a bit more on the heavy set. And I couldn't complete all of it because it was hard. But, you know, again, like I said, I took a year and a half of that when I was about 12 and a half, coming on to 30. I left school. I got driven out of school, may I say, because the racist institution was actually rearing its ugly head, and it didn't care who saw it at that time. So it's not undercover now. It's not covert now that you can't see it. It's right in your face. You know, again, before I must say this to you. My only friends in school were National Front. My only friends. My friends were like teddy boys, because you still had teddy boys in my area who were right wing. You know, they had two standards of racism in my time, right? Yeah, they, like I said, you heard the song, what I said about nigger, nigger, lick my boots. Right, yeah, they had plenty of songs. They had the songs for the Asians, you know. We see the red lights flashing, we're going packy bashing. They had millions of songs, you know. So actually, a lot of them, by my time of growing up, were, I tell you, the blacks really put up a very hard fight, and they see the Asians as a more easier target. I thought, but a cohort of racism was more directed at Asians at that time. I'm not saying that it didn't happen to blacks, because it did, full stop, everywhere you went, but you had a certain cohort, like I had a lot of skinhead friends, because even at that time, I had dreadlocks. That was one of my problems at school, you see, because they couldn't accept my culture. I was just beginning to see the light, you know. So, yeah. So going forward from that and leaving school, you know, actually, when I left school, I had to leave home. There was no way you could stay at home when you've left school. So I actually went and they used to call it to a tabernacle, a place of learning, a tabernacle. The Jewish people use it now. A tabernacle is like a sanctuary, a holy place, where I went, where there was a lot of Rastas there, you know.
So did you live there as well?
Yeah. I lived there for a while. but I was always questioning, you know. So like, I was there for maybe 6 months, but they were very much humble. I had by then become more of a revolutionary. I've become more anti-system because it drove me that way, you know. So,
so at this point, you're like 14 years old?
Yeah.
That's the same age as my son now, and he's so cocooned. Do you know what I mean? So protected. And that brings me to my next question, really, because my sons, you know, we live in a sleepy town, more like a village, really, and they see the police, school, NHS, all as institutions that are there to protect them and make them feel safe. Even with what happened with George Floyd, I know my youngest son in particular was very upset, and it made him start questioning whether the police were there to protect him or not. And so that makes, so from your point of view and your children, because you have children too, how have things changed? I mean, how did it, I kind of know the answer already, but how did you see those institutions? Did they make you feel safe? And how do your children view them?
Optimist. Actually, I can carry on my story then from I was 14. Because when I was 14, what happened, I got attacked with my friend by about 8 National Front people, young kids, as young as us, you know, and before our way out of it, about half hour after that, the police arrested us. I got remanded into a children's home where my mother visited me once and she said she's never coming back there because I've left home by then. I got remanded in a children's home all the way till I was 16. So I was 16.
So you were the victim of a hate crime, and you got the punishment for being the victim of a hate crime.
Yeah, and I got remanded in secure unit Farrell House, you know. So then what happened, right, is when I was 16, they charged me then, right? Well, sentenced me from the children's home, and I went to detention center, right? And detention center, that was very hardcore in the end of the 70s, 80s. So firstly, they cut off all your locks, right? You had to call sir. Your name was Sam, Sambo, right? Every black man, right? You was under the cosh. You got whipped.
So it was just, let me just interrupt. It's adults. It's adults calling you Sambo.
These are the screws, the officers. This was commonplace.
So first of all, you haven't even committed a crime, you've been a victim, then they lock you up, wait until you're 16 and then charge.
Cut off my locks.
That just makes me want to cry. It just makes, you know, I think of my own sons and it just makes me want to cry.
So I didn't get probation, right? I didn't get caution. Remember, you know, I got attacked and my friend.
It just sounds illegal, to be honest. The whole thing just sounds illegal.
That's what they call institutional racism. Right. So at that point, I had my first experience of, you know, detention center. Well, I went on to do YC, that's youth custody, YP, that's youth prison. I've done Boston, I've done most of the systems what they put in place. You know, I've done Dartmoor and all around the country, you know, for 30 years. You know, not at one stretch, in, out, in, out. Again, was it my fault? Of course it was my fault because I was the one who was committing or doing what I was doing. I mean, at the end of the day, Was I driven to it? Was it the outcome of my education? Most definitely, because we're talking about outcome, measurable
Yes,
outcome.
that's what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Right.
When we talk about outcomes, we talk about do kids end up, if they're excluded from school, do they end up in the criminal system? Do they end up, what is a literacy like, numeracy, what are their relationships like, what are their job prospects like?
Okay, so before I go on to that, I'm sorry, you gave me a two-part question, which was, how do my kids feel about the same situation? So honestly, I'll finish off the answer and I'll be as swift as possible. With my own case, with the police, I've got stopped and searched, I don't know, maybe 1,000 times. I've got taken into consideration, and that was a law what they disbanded, a racist law, what they used in the West Midlands Crime Squad. They was renowned, they got done for, you should remember that. That's TIC, taking into consideration. They put 1,000 crimes on me over, you know, right, what I didn't commit. Right, yeah. So you could go out, you know, because we wouldn't let you out unless you take something, you know, right, yeah. So where it came to the mental health system at that time, I see my friends being dosed with all different things. I seen a lot of, so it unprepared, you know, compared to anyone else, right, yeah. You know, we see our own underneath the cosh. It didn't matter if you was a criminal or not. It didn't matter if you was a fact, because if you're going to end up in the mental health system, it would be very hard as a black person to come out, because it's going to overjob you and keep you there more longer than anybody else. And it's the same shit. So I didn't have much faith in that. I had faith in the system, that the system was doing what it was doing, and the system was designed to do exactly that, right? Yeah, so the system worked because it is a racist system, and that's what I'm trying to say. Institutions, they wouldn't be changing today. Why are they changing? The lack of diversity within schools. What is the lack of diversity? The lack of education. But it's not, you know what it is? It's because from the victor comes the history. And after a certain point in time, everything's got whitewashed. History's been taken away. It's a Eurocentric way of thinking about things. I think that way. You think that way. Teachers think that way. You know, we have to come out of the country. For example, in Spain, they laugh at Christopher Columbus discovering the Indies, because in their chronicles, in their Spanish chronicles, they said that he was imprisoned in one of their prisons, right? So we see history from different countries written different ways, you know. Talking about my children now, I'll go back to the answer. Sorry, I always go that way. Lash me, tell me. So
I was just about to jump in and to ask you if your children, how they feel. Yeah.
My oldest son, he's got stopped and searched numerous amount of times.
So, and where does your son live? Just to clarify. In Wales.
He lives in Wales now, but he grew up in Luton, you know. Okay. Right? So he's got stopped and searched and harassed numerous amount of times. My other son, I'm just speaking about my sons in Wales anyway. I've got stopped and searched and harassed numerous amounts of times. My grandson, who's 18, who comes to visit, always feels apprehensive. He feels apprehensive where he's in Wolverhampton, but like, you know, he knows what it's to be in Wales, to be under the cosh, to be a minority of people, and to be scrutinized by police. So, do they trust the police? I think my son, my youngest son, Zion, he...
oh, I love that name.
Yeah, he actually seen some racial, what, you know, I just gotta call it behavior, what was happening to African youth. He put it through our process, and the result was the people got charged, the youth got safeguarded, and it was a good result. So he understands that there's a process, and the process what we use isn't the police. It's more like RCC.
Okay.
You know, yeah. Really, right? Yeah. And then once you go through that multinational, because it's for all nations, you see. Once you go through that process of going through RCC, then your voice becomes stronger as an individual. Yeah. So I'm just gonna, actually,
for people listening, I'm just going to say that RCC is Race Council Cymru, which is a charity that supports people suffering or people that are in the minority and just need a bit of help, isn't it, for whatever reason? But also you can report hate crimes through them.
So and again, with Black Lives Matter and things like that, they see that using that process is much more effective to have their voice heard. They've been, again, maybe it's hereditary, they suffer with ADHD, autism, and, you know, things like that. They've never had no help through the schooling system. I fought for them for years. Oh God, yeah. Some places, you know, and the book dry, and it's not. I don't think that's even colour. That's not a bad colour. That's just a bad.
You know, in my research, I found that Black Afro-Caribbean children are excluded at higher rates than anyone else, and Gypsy Romani children next. And part of the reason for that is because when they have learning disabilities, they're classed as bad behaviour due to their culture, rather than them being assessed properly for the additional learning need that they have. So it sounds like what I've read in my research has been true in your family.
It's been true. The point I was making, just for clarity, when I said it didn't seem that way, it was just exclusive to Black, is that the people who was fighting for their families as well, for them to get recognised, like you say, for having that condition, they varied, and, you know, the system wasn't right for no one. Now, exclusion, I think, how far did you look back with your exclusion rate?
To be honest, I've been looking more at the Windrush era and afterwards. That's what I've been looking at. So from 1950s really up to present day.
So that seems right to me. That seems right to me. You know, with my experience through the decades and having kids and grandkids in the same system, do they trust the system? No, we're creating a new system. I won't go back through it. You know, I see that the multi-partners, including the police, the tri-services, you know, the armed services, you know, Navy and Army and Air Force, and you know, groups and each and every one coming together in one voice, and, you know, and giving a platform. Do you know what I like, actually, is, yes, exclusion, but now it's the inclusion I know that people are trying to retain teachers, get black teachers, retain soldiers, get black soldiers, retain police, get black police. Yeah. Because there is a lack of trust in those institutions for black people. This is a true reflection of the situation. You know, they all know they've got to change. Most systems, institutions, including the church, were built up off the back of slavery, with the history to propel the I'm being polite, the shortcomings of the ethnic minority to the higher calling of the privileged white majority, you know. So again,
so, Chris, still thinking along those lines then. You know, I'm a teacher now, just a newly qualified teacher. Thank you. And, you know, some of the experiences you've talked about, okay, I wasn't beaten, but I did have the cane and things like that in school. And I do feel very much that my culture was ignored, at the very least, if not looked down upon. So I want to ask you, how can we as teachers do better? Because, and I'm not just talking about just black children here, I'm talking about how do we do better as teachers to be inclusive, to make everybody feel safe and cared for?
If we all knew that, we'd all have a job for life, eh?
Yeah.
Well, my view would have to be the same ethical world citizen view.
Which is actually part of the new curriculum. So you're very well read, Chris.
And, you know, it's the incorporation of all, dealing with everyone as an individual, sharing and caring. So actually, if I break it down, every child have got their own story. And what we air in comparison is that the classes are filled with you know, to Boston, the teachers haven't got enough. Now, there's a disparity in what you're saying, because if we want to create ethical world citizens, so that our children understand that even if there isn't a black or Asian or a minority ethnic in the school, that actually these people exist, these people have contributed to the country, these people have got a dual heritage, these people are actually a part of and are woven into society. A lot of these people, and this is a hint, are Commonwealth, who the Queen is the Queen of the Commonwealth. You know, she's the Queen of the Commonwealth now, which doesn't hold no powers, but they all accept all Commonwealth nations. There are 54 Commonwealth countries, you know. So the 54 Commonwealth countries, a lot of children hail and their parents hail or are descendant from those countries. So we first must incorporate the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth countries. And so then we look to bring and involve everyone's cultures. So, you know, we've got Tonga, we've got China, we've got Jamaica, we've got Burma, we've got so much, 54 countries anyway. So that's a good footing for any teacher to be inclusive of any culture, at least 54 cultures. Now, what how would they access it, and what resources, how would they do that? I think, firstly, you've got to get a bit local So I'm using the curriculum here. So you've got to use your own locality. What they mean, and your own versatility. Yeah. So what that means is that maybe you might have a Polish child or a Samoan child in your school. You know, so actually, if we looked at the Commonwealth and we looked at the countries and those countries, we can see the connections, we can see the migration, we can see the contributions, why they was called, the lack of this in England to create that travel. We understand that. So I think a lot of it is that we've got to go out our way to the individual children to get them recognised and get their cultures recognised, and the link between their culture and the UK culture, the Welsh culture, the world culture. You know, again, resources. Well, look, we can look at the war, the First and Second World War. We can look at the contributions of the Commonwealth, or bring it back to Jamaica, like a good Jamaican. You know, so we've got the Jamaican regiment, but it's the West Indian regiment. It's the longest service regiment. Highly decorated. We've got a lot of heroes. We've got a lot of stories. We do a lot of presentations around with it. We talk a great deal, and we contributed in line with Windrush after the Second World War, and why they called our people again after they called us to serve. They called us again builder. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So we look at all of these things and contributions. Now take it away from Jamaica and bring it to the world. Right. Yeah. We've got the African regiments. We've got the Yemenese regiment. Right. Yeah. Now it's an easy exercise. You look at their flag. You look at their heroes. You look at their contributions. You look at their culture. Now, I know that it could be as well as you're looking at their food, right? Yeah.
That's my favorite place to look.
or their food, their folk stories, you know, but we must look, and we must not only look, we must incorporate it, we must use it as a resource. So bringing it local means that, like I said, if you had 1, 2 children, even if you haven't got none, then you look at the nearest contribution, what has affected that part of the country by whichever immigration of people. And then you start there and you join that together. You know, nobody never said to nobody, this curriculum has to be done in 5 years. This is a long piece of work.
It is, yes. It's
the
not
teachers,
going to be done overnight.
No, the teachers, honestly, it's the label, Black history. Black isn't a color. The history itself, you know.
It's a culture.
It's cultures. History is cultures. You know, you're taking it away. The history is cultures. So when we talk about Black history, I think the teachers feel incumbent, and it's a must that they must learn about this and learn about that. What they've got to do, they're talking about decolonizing, right? Yeah, is decolonize your mind. I'll say it again, decolonize your mind. And that means you'll have to come from not the Eurocentric point of view, but a world point of view.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because actually, if we persist in downplaying other cultures' contributions, then the pride, what that installs to the individual as a child. If I knew about all the history, what I knew about the First World War, I didn't even know black people served in there for England.
Yeah.
And two, how they made a difference to the course of the war.
Yeah.
You know, when we talk about Windrush, you know, and we talk about contributions, it's economical. So it's economic, right? Yeah, it's the economic, right? Yeah, and with that, right? Yeah, every towel, every brush, every piece of linen, every gram, what we play our music, the music grams, what was brought, every the English didn't have no money, the UK didn't have no money, it's just been done in by war, you know, it was the poorest, they needed the money of the immigrants who came over here to rebuild, you know, they needed the labor for us to build up, you know, I do say it's a bit diabolical when you're building all of the housing estates, and for 5 years, you know, you can't go on that. You know, so our people, they act to be versatile and adaptable and use unity, like things like partner, right? Yeah, you know, partner.
Yes, partner, yeah.
Yeah.
My grandparents used to do it, they did it, yeah, because they couldn't get mortgages, so that was how they saved money to get a deposit for their mortgage. Yeah.
And could you explain to the audience what a partner is?
So partner is when you trust somebody, a group of people with your little money, your savings, and then it's kind of like a group funding, isn't it? So they trust each other, and then as each of them are ready to take out their money and deposit, they can buy a house. And sometimes one of them would buy a house and the rest that would partner with them might even live in the house as like a bed sit situation until they'd built up enough money to move on to their house. And that's the thing, most of them were buying properties, weren't they? They weren't even renting. But for me and you, because our mums were single moms, they couldn't do that. So they had to wait for council property. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm glad you put that in because this opportunity really was for those who had a mother and a father, and you know they'd work both night and day, both parents.
Yeah.
You know, they would put their partner in, feed their house, and that's how most people did obtain. And most Black people did have houses because they couldn't rent houses, only the slums, and you know, they built the houses themselves as well because they had the best plumbers, the electricians, they had, you know, soldiers with trades, you know, who came here to contribute.
So Chris, what would your closing, if I asked you to say in one sentence, what would your closing message be as a child of the Windrush? And just summing up, I'm asking for education because I'm a teacher and there's going to be a lot of teachers at my event. So what would be your final message to us as educators?
To treat each and everyone as an individual. I understand that the time is limited where you can spend on each child, but the time has to be spent. Don't leave nobody behind. Unify your class with the contributions of everyone, and that will make the garden flourish. You know, the garden hasn't got one flower in it, you know, and it takes all sorts to make it. So actually, this is incumbent on you as a teacher. You're the one who are guiding that child from one path to another. So that transition is going to be more out if you yourselves understand your end journey. Now that we know what the end journey is to become an ethical, well citizen, we must imply the best resources. Don't pressure yourself and say, what am I going to do? What am I going to use? Don't pressure yourself like that. There are resources. There are numerous resources. Look at government's resources, the Welsh Assembly government's resources. Look at Black historian resources, like Race Council Cymru, like East, like other people, have a look at some of our professional people to come and speak to you going forward, and use the expertise what's out there. It's not a guessing game. History changes all the time. We uncover new things, what debunk old things. The history is this. We're all looking for a bit of equality. And it takes parity in, well, it takes a bit of equity to give equality in some cases. And if that is the case, use equity. That means putting in that little extra effort, where you wouldn't call it.
That's fantastic. Do you know, I think that's a lovely message to end on. Do you know, it's been lovely talking to you, and I've learned a lot from you, not just today, but other times that we've spoken. And I really appreciate that you've shared so much of your personal story with us, because that is, things that you've been through, that you've talked about today, that could even be very traumatic for you. So I appreciate that you've opened up in that way and given me, and I'm sure lots of other educators, a lot to think about. So thank you very much for that.
Dear Campbell, thank you very much, Nat. Blessings and honor, Rastafari live, and hopefully we'll all sing the same song in there.
Yeah, thank you, my brethren.
Blessings, my daughter.